The 94th Academy Awards was supposed to be Hollywood's grand night, gowns flowing like silk rivers, suits stitched with status, the air buzzing with anticipation. Celebrities were seated beneath golden chandeliers, 1,000 camera flashes catching them mid-laugh, mid-sip, mid-glance. But no one, not even the producers, nor the security team, nor the millions watching live, could have predicted the slap that would echo around the world. Chris Rock stepped onto the stage with the ease of a man who lived in the spotlight for decades. His jokes came sharp and fast, like a boxer who knew when to jab and when to retreat. But then came the line, the one that stopped time for a split second. "Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it." A chuckle from the audience. A smirk from Chris. But Jada Pinkett Smith, seated just a few rows away, wasn't smiling. Her face turned to stone. And beside her, Will Smith's expression twisted, first into confusion, then recognition, then a storm. Chris Rock hadn't made the joke blindly. He'd seen Jada's shaved head, a bold, powerful image. But behind it was something he didn't fully grasp: alopecia. An autoimmune disorder. A source of pain, vulnerability, and loss. And still, he joked. Why? Because Chris had always pushed boundaries. His comedy was rooted in discomfort, finding absurdity in pain, in race, in marriage, in the politics of Hollywood. To him, the G.I. Jane reference was topical, light, even admiring. Demi Moore had shaved her head for the role. It symbolized strength, rebellion. That was the context Chris thought he was invoking. He didn't realize the joke cut deeper than any punchline. Will, at first, laughed, the automatic, polite laugh of a man who'd been trained to wear the mask in public. But when he turned to his wife and saw her eyes, not furious, not dramatic, just tired, wounded, weary, something ancient sparked inside him. A rage not born from ego, but from love, from exhaustion, from years of jokes, rumors, interviews, red table talks, entanglements, and judgment. Will Smith rose. It wasn't fast. It wasn't a lunge. It was deliberate. A walk that split the air with tension. The audience thought it was a bit, that maybe Chris was in on it. He wasn't. Will stood before him, just a few feet away. Chris barely reacted before. Slap. The sound was crisp. Real. The crowd gasped, uncertain if they were witnessing comedy or violence. Chris rocked slightly on his feet, blinking. Wow, he said, trying to laugh it off. Will Smith just smacked the S*** out of me. Will turned, walking back like a man who had done what he had to do, like it wasn't about the Oscars anymore. It was personal, raw, unfiltered. He sat. Then came the voice. Loud, shaking, unapologetic. "Keep my wife's name out your ****ing mouth." Twice. The theater fell silent. Even the cameras didn't know where to cut. Even the orchestra didn't know what to play. Chris, stunned, stared at the crowd, then back to Will. "That was the greatest night in the history of television," he muttered, trying to salvage the moment. But it wasn't over. It was only beginning. Backstage, the tension had thickened like fog. Chris Rock stood in the wings, blinking rapidly, his cheek tingling, his pride rattled but strangely intact. No one rushed to him. No one asked if he was okay. Because in Hollywood, image matters more than injury, and silence often follows shock. What people didn't know, what cameras didn't capture, was the weight Chris carried into that night. He wasn't just a comedian with a mic. He was a man who had spent decades turning personal trauma into punchlines. Bullied as a child. Assaulted. Mocked. He learned early that if he didn't laugh first, someone else would. Humor became his shield. And sometimes, it cut deeper than he meant. The G.I. Jane joke wasn't pre-written. It wasn't planted by producers or rehearsed in cue cards. It came out naturally, as many of his best lines did, riffing off the moment, chasing the reaction. To him, it was a harmless callback, a visual comparison. But it hit a nerve he hadn't studied. He didn't know Jada had gone public about her alopecia. Didn't know the tears behind her decision to go bald. Didn't know the way it affected her self-worth, her femininity, her identity. And Will? He was no longer the Fresh Prince. No longer just an action star. He was a man publicly carrying the scars of a fragile marriage, a man who had sat at a red table and been questioned about his masculinity in front of millions. That slap wasn't about one joke. It was about years. Years of being seen as a meme. Years of being mocked for Jada's entanglement. Years of being expected to smile through it all, the cheating rumors, the headlines, the podcast jokes, the alpha male dissection of his every move. For Will, that night had started with hope. He was nominated for Best Actor. He was finally being recognized not for charisma, but for depth, for King Richard, a role about a father fiercely protecting his daughter's futures. And then, in one line, that dignity felt ripped away again. So when he walked on stage, it wasn't just for Jada. It was for all the nights she cried in private. For all the times he held his tongue to keep the peace. For all the mocking gifts, the tabloids, the whispers at parties. It wasn't right, not by the rules of the Academy, not by the standards of civility. But it was real. Chris, still standing in the shadows backstage, finally broke the silence. He hit me like I was his therapist, he muttered, half laughing. It was his way of coping, finding the absurdity in the pain. And Will, back in his seat, stared blankly at the stage. The adrenaline had begun to fade. Regret was creeping in, not because he'd stood up for his wife, but because he had let the world see him unmasked, vulnerable, human. Later that night, he would win the Oscar. He would give a tearful speech. He would apologize to the Academy, but not yet to Chris. Because wounds, especially old ones, don't close with applause. Not just clips, but slow-motion remixes, international headlines, and Twitter storms that spun faster than facts. News anchors clutched pearls, comedians scrambled to write takes, and fans everywhere picked sides. Team Will or Team Chris? Hero or villain? Defender or aggressor? The internet had crowned a new king of chaos, and his throne was made of pixels. But behind the noise, both men were reeling. Chris Rock returned to his hotel room in silence. No press statement. No Twitter reply. Just stillness. He looked in the mirror and examined the faint red mark, barely visible now, but still there. A reminder. Not of pain he'd endured worse, but of misunderstanding. He wasn't angry. He was confused. Was the joke worth it? Had he truly crossed a line? Or had the line moved beneath him? He replayed it in his head. The words. The delivery. The laughter, brief, unsure, awkward. He hadn't meant to wound. But meaning didn't matter. Only effect. Meanwhile, Will Smith's night wasn't over. After his tearful acceptance speech, he attended the Vanity Fair afterparty. Cameras flashed. He danced. The Oscar still in hand. But behind his eyes was a storm. Everyone congratulated him, but no one mentioned the slap. That was Hollywood etiquette. Smile first, process later. When he got home, the silence hit harder than the spotlight. Jada was there. She hadn't cried. She hadn't scolded. She simply looked at him like she had 1,000 times before, like a man constantly walking the line between protector and performer. She knew he thought he was defending her. She also knew the world would only see rage. Publicly, the Academy issued a statement. They were reviewing the incident. Words like disciplinary action and ban began to circulate. Privately, calls were made. Managers, publicists, damage control. Will had built a career on being lovable, bankable, a star your mom could trust. And in one unscripted moment, that image cracked. But it wasn't just his image at risk. Black entertainers whispered in private chats, "They won't forgive us for this." The pressure to always be composed, grateful, safe. Will had broken the mold, and now the mold threatened to collapse on him. Chris, too, was being examined. Critics asked if he'd gone too far. Memes called him soft for not swinging back. Others praised his restraint. But no one asked how he felt. And neither man spoke publicly yet. For the first time, two of the most recognizable black men in America were not seen as actors, but as humans who had failed to be perfect. And maybe that was the most American part of all. Behind the scenes, Will began drafting an apology, not to save face, but because something inside him had started to hurt in a new way. Not from guilt, but from clarity. He hadn't just slapped a man. He had reopened wounds he didn't even know he'd buried. Chris, on the other hand, began writing new material. Jokes. Reflections. He didn't want revenge, he wanted to process. The only way he knew how. Through laughter. But the world wasn't ready to laugh. Not yet. Because the moment had become bigger than both of them. It was about race, masculinity, trauma, forgiveness, and all the messy, complicated humanity that Hollywood tries to clean up in post-production. The headlines faded, but the echo remained. Not just in Hollywood, but in living rooms, barbershops, classrooms. The slap had become a symbol, a meme, a cautionary tale, a cultural mirror. Will Smith broke his silence first. In a carefully framed video, seated in a minimalist room with soft lighting and no makeup, he spoke to the camera, not like a movie star, but like a man on the edge of confession. "I was wrong," he said. "Not just for what I did, but for what it meant." He talked about rage. About growing up in a household where his mother was hurt and he had done nothing. How that night, it felt like he was finally doing something too late, in the wrong way, but from a place he didn't fully understand. He apologized to Chris, to the academy, to the public, to his children for becoming the thing he swore he'd never be. But more than that, he asked for patience. "I'm still learning," he said. "Still healing." And it wasn't just a PR move. It felt earned. Chris Rock stayed silent for a while. Then, during a live Netflix special months later, he finally addressed it. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He joked, but the jokes had teeth. "You know who hits harder than Will Smith?" he said. "My therapist." The crowd roared. Then he added, "But I'm not a victim. I took that hit like Pacquiao, baby. And I stood up. That's power too." He acknowledged the pain, but also the absurdity. He didn't excuse Will, but he didn't drag him either. He processed the only way he knew how, through comedy that bled truth. And for the first time since the Oscars, people laughed not at the moment, but with it. Something shifted. People began to see both men not as caricatures, but as case studies in human emotion. One cracked under pressure. The other absorbed the blow with grace. Both were flawed. Both were real. And eventually, they met, in private. No cameras. No press. Just two men in a room, trying to be more than their worst night. They talked. Listened. Didn't always agree. But they found common ground not in perfection, but in pain. It didn't fix everything. But it was a start. The Academy revised their policies. Comedians treaded differently around trauma. Public conversations about masculinity, mental health, and accountability deepened. And most importantly, viewers, fans, critics, strangers began asking themselves harder questions. Would I have laughed at that joke? Would I have stood up for my partner? Where's the line between reaction and responsibility? The slap wasn't just about two celebrities. It was about all of us. Because sometimes, the most powerful moment on live TV isn't the award. It's what happens when people stop performing and start revealing who they really are.